not canceling things, not ending things yet. No guarantees I make it to the end of the interphase. I mean, we're fairly deep into the game, and I know what's happening. As I said before, we've got not a lot of advance by the Germans compared to the historical up there, and we're at the point where there's tons and tons of improved positions available in an infinite amount very shortly. So I'm not expecting to see as much ground being gained as has been previously. In terms of reinforcements, we had a few replacement pieces. We've got a new French army coming on, another French corps that, you know, given that the French aren't attacking, corps don't really matter much. But, you know, if I had a place where there were a lot of independent units, it might be important. If a lot of this terrain had been captured and I have to cover more ground, another army would be particularly important. I'm not seeing a lot of counterattacks, though. I'm not seeing a need to coordinate those independent units into corps formations particularly. The other thing we've got is all these artillery, and I found the rules on them. So on these turns, we're going to get 2 of them on a particular army depot. Again, how much does that help? Not much. They're just a couple artillery factors in each case. They give a little defensive value, etc. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but it's not like adding new infantry divisions that you pulled in from overseas or anything. So that'll be pretty minor. The reality of why I'm continuing to play, it's a matter of habit more than anything else. I've gotten kind of into the motion of playing over the last day or two. And the next thing I want to do, I haven't read the rules for, I'm reading a book right now. I hadn't been counting on and playing video games. So I hadn't really been counting on doing much, so we'll just keep plodding through and see when I get totally fatigued of it. The result of a pile of entrenchment markers, probably I laid down more entrenchment digging ins than I actually have markers that I'm allowed for. It's probably pretty close. But I'm not expecting all of these positions to hold. I'm expecting the Belgians, for example, to get pushed out. And who knows what else. But I'm basically digging in everywhere along the line with the intention of, yep, I'm good, man. Especially since I can, rally the troops in the front lines as long as there's an improved position. That's a huge difference. And we had actually a couple of cases of that, like down here or something, where I'm too close to the enemy normally. Well, actually, I was within range that I could have done this before because it's 2 hexes away in an improved position before. But I wasn't really terribly aware of that. And launching attacks, this one's pretty iffy. I'm not doing a prepared attack, which I don't know how well that's going to go. But here I'm launching an attack as well with the idea of kind of forcing the Germans to do something to deal with that part of the line where they're maybe a little weaker locally, and then worrying about strengthening the rest of my lines. I do not expect to see too much more of a gain in terms of German territory. And yeah, this is pretty terrible for a Schlieffen plan, isn't it? That noise is my wood stove. I've got the fan running on it. Okay, so I stopped in the midst of sort of the combat actions for various reasons, but the French have succeeded in pushing some of the entrenchment line back, and that disorganizes the Strasbourg army in terms of, like, it had a solid line. Now, I mean, it's still connected and everything, but I may have to work a little harder to get that line into place. And I can give up ground, you know, if holding the passes or something becomes a difficult action. I can, you know, link only to these passes and let these go by. That would be a fair option, but that would be stretching my line to about its limit, and I would have trouble giving up territory then. The other French attack, wherever the hell I had it, over here, the prepared attack, didn't really do much. The Germans, I'm about to hit a whole slew of attacks up here, but they succeeded with their one attack, which is they pushed a little further here. This is kind of interesting because this is the 45-45 space. That's the break-even point. So from now on, I'm going to be producing some positive points in the interfaces, assuming I can hold that wedge in the French line. And it's pretty painful. You know, I mean, I've got this little channel I'm digging through. I've got to open that wider, and that's hard to do with the escarpments over on this side, Toul, and Verdun right over here. I don't have a lot, but if I can kind of break down this way especially, I can open that up and make something that maybe I can actually sustain. However, and this is the key point, it's not these points over here that I've got collected that are the big deal. Okay, so now I'm at like -12, and I'll be able to probably gain most of them back over the course of the game. It's all these little victory point spaces. I don't remember what the exact amount is, but these guys are worth like 15, and I'm break even on them, right? Because I took Nancy and I took Antwerp. That's fine. But the blue ones, I have almost none of them. The vast majority are deep within France, expecting that kind of Schlieffen maneuver that grabs a lot of the territory. That's not going to happen. I mean, I've seen, you know, how ineffectually I've pushed. You know, it looks impressive, but it's not compared to the historical, and that's the whole thing. I got off on the bad starting foot when I launched my initial attacks up there with the 1st and 2nd Army. I didn't push them hard enough. I think it's still possible for this kind of situation to come about, even if you do push them hard, but I don't know. That would be something to better take up with the designer in terms of, hey, you know, could I have, if I had pushed so hard, could I have failed as badly as I have? My natural tendencies, though, are just not to push that hard. After finishing up the attacks, Germans didn't do a whole lot better. The one place where they really got a good hit in was where? I'm looking for it. I think here. Yeah, we punched some guys who were digging in who had no right to be in the line. They were combat ineffective. This is one of those oopses. I don't know, you know, how I could have made the line work. I probably would have left a gap between the Brits and the French instead, which might have caused just as big a problem. But anyway, I hit something that had no right to be there. and now it's demoralized and has a lot more work to do. We had a fort die over here at Maubeuge, and that's really about it. The big takeaway that I can barely remember because I had a whole work day in between was the advance by the French here. That's going to cause some issues. Notably, the Belgians held us off. The Brits, of course, you know, they're not being pressured that hard. First Army is focusing against those territorial units, trying to get as much ground as possible. The other big thing, hey, we're at a point where We're actually going to make small amounts of positive gain from now on, probably on the victory point track every interphase, but again, it's not enough to make up for what we didn't get. I had these hopes that this line would collapse, that being put under stress constantly, that the units would just sort of melt away, but they don't. They can fall back. There's little ways you can give up a few hexes if you do things right and recuperate your units while they're forming up a line before the enemy gets to hit you again. Mainly just the way the points, work between the two different phases. So when your opponent hits you on their turn, they hurt you. But you get to fall back with some of your units 5 hexes, 5 movement points, a couple of hexes, maybe 3 if you're willing to take a roll. And then you're probably in a position where those units that fell back from the line early before the rest of the line got hit, right? Now that weakens your line, but you can do it, are then in a position where they can fully recover a whole CEL level, which can put them into a healthier state, as long as they're not demoralized. And the other units can sort of leapfrog behind them. So as long as you're willing to keep a couple of units, in the backfields, not in the front of the line. Now that weakens your line. But now the game's changed. Now, as soon as we get those improved positions dug in, and that happens during the German turn, we can start recovering right in the front lines. So that's actually kind of the big deal about this, is that it broke something that would have been able to be fully entrenched and start recovering. And once you're recovering in the line, then you don't have to play those games. You don't have to weaken your line in order to fall back. Plus your line has the defensive benefit of the improved position. Now, it wasn't the case until this turn. Changes that you have to add progressively can be painful. In this particular case, I keep forgetting about the effect of these ammo shortages. They're in places where there's actual fighting going on. It probably doesn't have much effect, but the French basically do not have enough ammo to launch a second attack here. And in fact, the Germans might be able to counterattack. And I ought to consider that as a possibility. Maybe taking this hex, for example, for what that's worth. Is that worth anything? Not really. Not really. It doesn't shorten my line. This hex, we still wouldn't shorten my line, but it wouldn't lengthen it. And it would get me back what I had, but, I'm where I am and whatever. Relatively massive set of attacks by the Germans. I don't know how well that's going to work. With one big gap. Here in the 5th Army, and part of the 4th, has fallen back and is recovering. They're not that badly damaged, but damaged enough that, given that I haven't gotten any ground, I don't want to keep pushing things. So falling back, recovering, let the Entente recover whatever it can. They could recover anyway because they've got entrenchments everywhere. So no big deal there. But boom, all along here, with a gap here between 1st and 2nd. That's not really... Actually, between the armies, you're seeing gaps occur. 1st and 7th also has a bit of a gap there, covered by like a line of communications unit. Just, hey, let's try to push stuff back everywhere. Attempt to try to take advantage of this little breakthrough that happened over here. And I didn't have an easy way to take advantage of this, so I'm just pounding in on what's really some entrenched positions up there and just try to clear some of that gap between Verdun and Toul and open that up a little bit. That's probably the best goal. And here, another prep fire on Nancy. Mixed results from the German attacks. For one thing, the prep fire went excellently. Pushed another hex out of the Nancy region. I think there's only one more hex. This one. I don't think this one has any. And then these become tool, which I don't think applies. That's why I moved my guns over, because even though it's real close and it seems to be part of the same fortress complex, no, not allowed. And that's one of the things. These are really, really, first of all, they're volatile. I like volatile results, but I mean, they can do almost nothing if you roll heavily. A couple of column shifts, a couple of E's, that might not send you running, you know? So then you just weaken some units and more units go in. But they can also be excessively effective, you know, I mean, 7 column shifts or whatever. And of course the terrain's important, but in this case, the terrain was good for the Germans. No gains over here, some real painful losses here, including a disaster at Maubeuge, or a potential disaster. Essentially, the French threw a unit in, an entire extra division in. They were able, because of this hex that's not pinned, they were able to get an extra division into play. And on top of that, I didn't use any big ammo. I just used the little guns, figuring there was a pretty good chance with a -1 on one of the dice that I roll a 6 and get that one hit that I need. Well, it didn't happen. I only have, what, 1 ammo left, 142 left. So, yeah, you know, that would be my only shot, which means no chance of like busting tool easily, as an example, although I guess I'm facing the same kind of situation. But I was real close to blowing this up, just on small fire from the last round, where I got lucky and got a couple of hits. So I'm like, well, screw it, you know, I'll get lucky again, right? It didn't happen. Ended up with a really, really bad result. Took a casualty. In fact, I think that wasn't the only place. I think I took 2 casualties because I was so bad on the chart. Ineffective, you know, attack plans. We did punch through here, which is kind of cool, making that Maubeuge position less and less tenable, you know, especially with the chasing that's going on up here. The BEF getting pushed around a little bit, the Belgians breaking. Now here I did an intensive attack, so I think I lost a total of 3 strength points for the Germans that are unanswered, unmatched. 2 from bad attacks, although the Maubeuge one could have gone a lot better, right? And then 1 from the intensive attack that I made. I thought I was going to get an outflank out of that if I succeeded with the first attack. It wasn't the case because the Belgians retreated into there. And this is the kind of funny thing I have. It's like, you know, the Germans are fixated on, well, how can I improve my chances of getting something? So they chose to make an intensive attack. The Belgians didn't make an intensive defense. It turned out the Belgians were the wise ones. That's the kind of mistake that I like to make, you know, where I didn't even roll a die for the Belgians. This does degrade their position greatly, though. I have some entrenchments around Dunkirk that are built onto the board, the good kind. And I'm tight enough already, and I lost, you know, a hex of entrenchments. I'm probably going to have to give this one up. I'm down to 2 remaining entrenchments. I didn't I removed a bunch of them and decided that this one and that one were important enough that I wanted to complete them. These things are all gone. They don't have much effect. I mean, you make a choice to slow down in an area and you slow down. But they're hard to see is kind of the issue, and hard to remember. There was something else I wanted to go. Oh yeah, no fortresses fell due to like just being squatted on for any length of time. I'm actually a little worried that I might lose something like this fortress and it returns back to French hands, because this is an almost untenable situation. You know, I'm just punching my way through. But if I can widen that front a little bit and throw the French back off that ridgeline, that would be incredibly valuable, you know. It would be a nice little bulge. And that's in my, hey, this is my best place, right? And this is where I actually gain victory points. The only place I'm gaining victory points. Again, there's just way too many of those little blue dots on the board that I don't own and will never own unless we see some kind of collapse that I just don't think is possible, especially now. But there's a lot of game left. A lot of game left to trudge through, getting my hopes up like they are kind of this turn a little bit. But, you know, honestly, no, it's just not possible. One thing I wanted to say, this is me coming right back, because that happens, is and now I lost it. I know I had something to say, but it's something along the lines of how thinned out the French line is really becoming. Oh yeah, and also imagine though how much thinner it would have to be if there was that big drive down into here early on, right? This is a lot shorter than something like this, you know? What would that make as a difference? Would that thin the line out in other places so that, you know, greater advances happen? Yeah, I think so. I think you end up with a very, very interesting situation where, but kind of no matter what, you know? I mean, I slam through here and it becomes, so the BEF, first of all, you'd have to drop back from that Maubert type position. But you'd basically have to try to cut it to there or something. And historically, they went beyond that easily. And to a point where it seems very, very difficult to maintain any kind of cohesive line, and it almost feels to me like the historical situation would end up really, really mobile, even late in the game, simply because, you know, where the Germans choose to throw a powerful offensive force, they're going to punch. They're going to punch a hole in it, in the French line, wherever it is, you know, because we're probably thinking about the French trying to defend using 2-hex units and stuff like that in some places. And as they weaken the line in other places to try to cover that gap there, you know, the opening there, well, it's easier to concentrate for the attack, especially with this silly, you know, oh, every 3 turns, I got to worry about consolidating my line. So, well, the nice thing about that is the Germans have to consolidate their line second, which means that the French can kind of trick around the turn right after an interphase. They can reduce their defensive line a little bit, but certainly by the time you start getting to the entrenchments, you don't want to start creating gaps in your line defensively. Offensively, though, it's perfectly fine. You know, as long as you're on the offensive on those 2 turns, the first 2 turns in between interphases, you can consolidate a little attack force, and, you know, now instead of getting 4 divisions against 1, which is what I'm generally seeing, except where I screw up. And I'm good with those kind of screw-ups. You're seeing 4 divisions against a half in too many places, I would think. And I just really feel like, you know, the French line would collapse pretty badly across the board. And there's just nowhere where you can get a defense, right? I guess you could give up this region. They didn't historically, you know. They stayed entrenched down here. They stayed here. So unless you're weakening these sections greatly, it seems difficult. Of course, the Germans are going to have to spread out a lot more too. And we're already seeing that some of their forces have some significant gaps. So maybe I'm being a little too overly optimistic about just how much the Germans could attack. But they certainly would have, my assumption is that they would have a lot more of, yeah, you can kind of pick where you want to hit. Of course, there is some timing to that. If you end up shifting forces someplace, if you do it by rail, where any significant shift is going to be involved, you totally telegraph your move, and the defender can shift around pretty easily to that. What I'm finding is, hunting weak spots and stuff, but you're not really allowed to know too much about your opponent's units. You can see their strength, but you don't know their CE value or anything like that. And the game really does actually manage a good job with these things to prevent you from knowing too much just how good a unit you're smashing against. You know how good it was. Stacks are hidden, but there aren't a lot of stacks in this game. There's not enough places where the defense can consolidate their forces that much. Allied line keeps falling back, especially here in the north, and it's causing problems. Seeing a gap opening up between the BEF and the Fifth Army. This is somewhat temporary, but the problem is it might mean that the line cannot hold as it is. Some of these entrenchments I built may not last. And the main reason is just the need to recover units. I don't have entrenchments everywhere. We're not quite at that point. That's going to happen next interphase, I think, is where we can dig in everywhere. And, I got one left. I don't know where that was going to go. I think I lost the hex for it. I think I had to withdraw from the hex I was going to use it for. It's not really that big a thing, though. But, yeah, I'm not fine. There were positions here where maybe I had some extra movement points that I would have been able to use, but I don't know anymore. But yeah, we've pulled the line about as thin as we can take it. And again, trying to use 2 hex units that halves the strength of the unit, it's hard enough holding the line with 1 unit, with 1 division in any given hex. I still have more thickness here than maybe I need. But other than where I'm launching attacks, which is more a result of that thickness than any real desire to gain ground in those areas, I don't really have a lot of excess force kicking around. I'm filling in the gaps here. It's just stretching here doesn't work any further. Maubeuge, I got a Maubeuge garrison. That can't fall back very far. It's got like a 6 hex radius. So I also just didn't have the movement points to make up for what the British did. They pulled away and opened that gap up. It's their fault, but they just didn't have the strength, especially with the Belgian withdrawals, to hold the line. Now, things get a little narrower here, so there's some possibility that maybe we give up the area around Dunkirk and whatnot. And what, Calais here? Yeah. To try to shorten the line a little bit. Because if we just drop this straight through, that works. The problem is the French line for the Fifth Army is not strong enough to hold. It's actually where a lot of the damage is being done. So I don't know quite what we're going to see there. Elsewhere, not being forced to leave so far. It's only in the north that I'm being pushed further and further. But again, it highlights, what the hell would you do if you had that historical situation? And there's something in me that's tempted to try, but I just can't keep throwing time into this system. There are things I love about it, and the combat table, the way it interacts with the movement system, I find those two sort of core elements really, really work. And then there's an attempt to achieve at least as much detail in other things like the organizational, which I don't really know adds very much to the game. And this should all be in the review, but I don't trust that I'm going to say it, and I said it, I was responding to somebody in a comment, and so some of it's kind of clearer in my mind. The way the artillery impacts things, the way the retreats are generated, the choices of the intense combat to try to take or hold a hex, particularly importantly, the prepared attacks, of course, which require you to be almost in place when you declare the attack, and it has to be in your side of the turn. There are things things that I don't like because they impose a certain rigidity on the game as well. For example, the way the rail network is repaired. So we've got hexes back here. This will be repaired on turn 14. Well, I'm on turn 20 now. The French haven't lost that. And what it means is that they never destroy that part of the rail net. Same thing with the red spaces. It feels to me like that should be handled in a different sort of mechanism. I'm not sure quite what, but the way the rail networks are destroyed and repaired just feels all wrong to me. Where there's a fixed turn when they get repaired, and the enemy may not have crossed your boundary there. And they're completely devoted to the Schlieffen plan working. There's nothing like them over here. What if the Germans go marching into here? Well, the victory points aren't up there, but you could win the game by making a breakthrough in the south, because the per interphase victory points are high enough. You still probably are going to need some of those blue spaces somehow, but I'm not discounting that as a strategy overall. And your rail network's going to be perfectly fine. The French will not do any damage to the rail network there. The game is entirely designed for only handling the Schlieffen plan. And if the Germans do something else, even an advance up the middle or something, there's just no rail damage that the French will do for that. Is it possible? I think so. Some of that depends on what the French give up. Hey, there's no victory points back here. I can give up a lot of ground and give to here. Well, ahistorical, sure, but there's no penalty to doing it, basically. There's this space that I captured. That's it. That is all that has been gained in all of this, very heavy concentration of forces down here. And those kind of start there because that's where the French assault begins. It doesn't feel general enough to really explore all the opportunities on the front. Even if you've got the Schlieffen plan and these are your goals and everything is set up, your armies are set that way, you could still shift them within the game and take another strategy, and that other strategy might be effective because of reasons that the game only assumes that you're going to play the Schlieffen plan, that, that you're not going to try something else. And, hey, the rail nets are clear. That makes life a little easier, because making the crossing here, that's never going to get fixed in the course of the game, no matter what, if you penetrate there. Anything down, but then down, you get a little further down to where they're not making advances, and there are fixes possible. There's no damage ever. Whereas up here, well, those will never get blown either because I'm too slow. And it might actually be a sensible plan to try to shift things that way right from the beginning, with the intention of, well, I'm going to have trouble keeping up with my rail net. My supply is going to be a problem if I go to the north. But in the south, I know the French aren't going to blow any of the railroads, so I can make a lot of ground there. I can avoid the penalty early on for the CEL, for the interphase victory points, and yeah, total brain fart. And who knows? Who knows? There might be really viable options for trying to punch through the mountains here, as opposed to. Now, I tried pretty hard. The Germans threw a lot of force in here, and they weren't able to get those Lorraine spaces. But that's another factor that adds to the value. There's another 6 points down there if you could concentrate a little harder in that way. And maybe the concentration that I'm putting here, maybe it should have, the concentration that I feel like I should have put here, maybe I should have excelled a little heavier here and tried to punch through there, because there are some definite advantages. These forts in the mountains, those are going to blow away pretty easily. Whatever this is, Epinal, that is not going to be trivial. That's major. Anyway, didn't make a whole lot of attacks, but one of the two they made, they gained ground over here. The Germans actually kept up the pressure, at least along this side. I think they gained a hex over here, but they also plowing into the Belgians, causing some issues over there, causing some issues against the French line. Yeah, so did not manage to reduce the Maubeuge fortress, which should be a 2 again. This was a French turn. It was never fully reduced. I was hoping, I probably thought it was a 1. But anyway, may not make another assault on it, as the French line is getting separated further and further from that. The thing is, with an offensive, with an assault, I have a flanking attack against that at this point. I had one against one of the Belgian units too, which collapsed the line there. And we're not really seeing that heavy a drive. We attempted this with flanking. That didn't give us anything. The combat system is highly, highly variable, and that's just a factor you have to look at. Remember to tilt him back. He got on his choo-choo. And then we'll hit the German side of this turn. These fucking substitutions. In this case, I had gathered all my cav together, thinking this is what I needed. The 9th Cavalry Division and any 2 other cavalry divisions. Well, it turns out one of those things that I thought was a division is a corps, and not one that I put on the map with a substitution. So now I've got to find me another division somewhere, and I actually railed one into place to get up there to try to create this damn thing. By the time I create it, I'm going to be almost done with the game. This was available to me back in turn 17. It is now turn 20 that I gathered the stuff together finally that I thought I could get it. And now I gotta find me another division somewhere. I don't even fucking know where there's a cav division left. This is a corps as well. There's gotta be one kicking around somewhere, but I don't know where. Here's one. That's a big division. That's So this is the problem. What I first looked at was like, wow, am I going to lose strength points off this? But what I have here is the 4th Cavalry Corps. And the way you can tell is that it says CC on it. Again, it was placed earlier, and I gotta look. I got, the 4th Cavalry Corps is now up here, along with some other division, the 2nd Division, I think. I gotta look. I got one more division left, and it's down with the 6th Army. Great. Jesus. Well, since I'm on vid, even though I put it on pause, my day has been, well, not terribly trying, but more eventful than most. First of all, work, which has been hectic and painful this whole year, honestly, and part of last year. Just getting out of hand. I found out that, I missed the date. There's this small window, a couple weeks, when we can, change our benefits. Okay, I don't have any desire to change my benefits, but I desire to keep them constant. And unfortunately, there's at least one thing in our benefits that disappears if you don't go in and change it. Anyway, I missed the date because of the hecticness of work, and so now I'm kind of screwed on that. And it's not a huge deal. It's just a shitty little thing where I'm not contributing to my HSA, which is probably okay because I don't go to doctors. And I do go to the dentist, though. But I was contributing at a much higher rate than I should anyhow. Certainly for me alone. But then, after work, and playing a little bit of this, I think, I decide, okay, I'm going to run. I'm going to go outside and enjoy. It was a pretty day. It's always hard for me to get outside on pretty days. And I took a nice long walk with a cigar. And unfortunately, I can't do anything where I'm sort of alone with my mind. I really have to drown my brain or else the sadness comes. Okay, I get home, I'm worn out from that, from the sadness, from exercise when I don't get any anymore. And then I read for a little bit. I make myself, I guess what's going to be my final meal of the day. And I sit down and decide I don't want to read while I'm eating because I've gotten out of that habit. So I'm just going to watch some news clips or whatever. And my computer's fucked up. And I end up, it's something I did to it myself by trying to set up a proxy on it. And, but I didn't realize that. I thought something was screwed up with drivers. I wasn't able to hit the internet through my browser, but I was everywhere else, which was really weird. And anyway, I had to I can't find my thumb drives anymore. I have a few of them, but none of them seem to be around. So I had to use my wife's hard drive. She has portable hard drives for her laptop, or I have them now, something, whatever, and had to use her computer because it had browser capability that was easier than dealing with any of the laptops, which are a pain in the fucking ass to deal with. My work one's not bad, but I have to log into work to do it. And, and I can look up some technical stuff on that with no problem. But, and hers is this weird tiny thing that I don't have a keyboard for, and all kind of shit is obnoxious about it. I do plug in a mouse on it at least. And yeah, I'm taking forever on this for no good reason. But anyway, I ended up stumbling into stuff that I've seen before of hers, but one thing that I hadn't, which was a calendar of her planned events for this year, and it just, boy, that and the other stuff and the walk just really slammed me hard emotionally. At the same time that I'm like, what the fuck's going on with my computer? Eventually I figured out what I had done wrong. I fixed that, but there's something else still wrong having to do with the router that I don't understand. But anyway. And so I decide, well, I think I'll come up here and try to finish up the turn. I actually thought I had finished up the turn and was going to go a third player turn today. That's apparently not the case. And then this stupid shit. It's like, oh, why am I bothering with this crap? And we're seeing the Germans actually beginning to entrench over here in the central region. A little bit around here, around Maubeuge. The reason we're not going to be limited to the number of entrenchments, so what the hell? Might as well do it everywhere when we're kind of stuck in place. And along this, yeah, I mean, I got entrenchments everywhere here. Along this sort of section, I don't see a lot of room for a lot of attacks. Moving the guns into place, preparing for another prep fire type situation, gain another hex, just keep trying to push, you know. Once we get Nancy out of the way, that changes things, and this becomes possibly an offensive point. All this, the reason it's so weakly held by the Germans is there's nothing of importance, you know, in terms of victory points. Now, clearly the Germans probably wouldn't be willing to risk this line facing any kind of significant French advance in any kind of strategic sense. Like if you're playing Le Grand Guerre, you don't allow this to sort of collapse, right? Or even get this weak on a defensive basis where you're losing territory. I am continuing attacks, some sporadic ones coming along through here, a little bit more aggressive up here. I mean, honestly, I'm trying to attack with everything I possibly can. You know, these guys in the 5th Army need to recover, and then over here, I'm kind of stretched to my limit. I know that next turn, I have to get myself into that contiguous line, and if I'm going to maintain this bulge, it's going to be a little expensive, so I've shifted forces over. That leaves a little bit of a gap here between 3rd and 4th Army. I don't know what to do about that. Are the French going to come storming through? Probably not. They could disrupt my supply sources, but that doesn't really affect a damn thing because I've got supply off the rails. It's not like we're moving quickly and the realm net is getting left behind. That's one of the things that I have not seen is any real use for the depots, much less those stupid trucks, because the advances have been so slow for the most part. The depots may have been important over here at some point while I was playing, but for the most part, I've captured all these rail lines and everything, and I don't need to track that. So my experience by not having seen the real Schlieffen develop, for whatever my own flaws are, means that I may be giving a tainted view in terms of, hey, I just started saying, screw these things, screw the bridge outs. They're really not that necessary. I can kind of keep, honestly, though, I think you can largely keep track of them for anything important without all those markers. I don't know. I mean, even if you were advancing rapidly, you can't be all that rapid, right? You know, without forced marching, you're looking at 4 hexes. With a reasonable forced march, maybe 5 hex advance. 5 hexes from a rail line that you've already got is in supply. Now, sure, there may be areas where the rail net isn't as dense, but it's pretty damn dense here. Now, where it dies, when these things go and the entire rail net is destroyed and can't be, or is evacuated and can't be easily reestablished. So again, you know, all the supply rules might make a little bit more sense to look at them in more detail and use all the counters that are involved in this. Under those circumstances, but I find supply in this is just, in general, so much easier and could have been abstracted away than it was in the Serbian game. I understand the desire to have a singular rule set and whatnot. However, this is the game that takes the supply, you know, to the greatest extent. Not just, well, the railheads I think existed in the Serbian game, but we've got all these bridge blowns, and those I really don't know if they need to be there. Because the crossings, if you're moving into enemy territory, you have to pay the cost for crossing the river. They repair on your next turn, so there's a brief period where you can't use those bridges. Okay. Finishing up the German side of the turn, we got a couple of interesting occurrences. We pushed a little further here. It's getting to the point where we can't keep pushing unless we can throw more troops in. On the other hand, the French have to try to cover this. I mean, the gap is frightening at the very least. It is possible to exploit a gap like that, so and I've got core over here that maybe if I divert stuff from the 5th Army into that Metz front, well, actually, if I divert whatever the hell it is that's sitting back here in the 5th Army, because it looks like 5th Army's taking these anyway, instead of covering the front so much. Now, I need those to some extent in this next turn because it's an interphase turn. But I might be able to just keep, you know, wiggling that tooth and seeing what I can dislodge. Because this is my best point area still. You know, I'm at like +3 or +4 per turn there. And I can just keep pushing that. In addition, nothing much over here. We did take a fort over here. One of them collapsed. But up in the north, it's fallen apart. We got gaps that we're creating here. Now, the French have been throwing more and more troops into 5th Army and 10th Army up there to try and patch this. But remember, there was a gap between the French and the English. Well, now there's kind of the Belgians have been pushed back. We'll see. They had a really nasty hit and also just decided to kind of abandon the line before results were in for that. But we have to get out of here and, you know, try to make that line make a little bit more sense. The problem is those units are so fucking tired of fighting. They have been taking the brunt of the assault, and it's still relatively clear terrain. We're beginning to get up to some higher ground, which will give us a column shift because it's not that kind of stuff, which means that there's no terrain shift for the increase. I find the map and the graphics on it not terribly attractive, but somewhat difficult to understand. You know, it's not hideous like some of the gamers stuff really is, but at least that stuff is really, really easy to see. Unfortunately, the hideousness is what makes it easy to see. It's a very late 80s, early 90s design style, which it's absolutely fucking clear what you're doing, but it's also really ugly. This is, you know, if it wasn't this glossy thin paper, not even paper, whatever the hell they make these out of that melts if you dribble on it, but it seems to be a little bit better fire resistant than other stuff. You know, I'm thinking this kind of color shading and whatnot with, you know, the old SPI like Bloody April or whatever, the old terrible Swift Sword, with that kind of paper and that kind of printing on it, I think it would actually be pretty attractive. I just find these really glossy maps that they've been printing recently a lot less so. And by recently, I never liked glossy maps, but they've gotten more prevalent and worse in at least the last decade, maybe a little further back. Yeah, I'm thinking GMT was pretty good if you pull out some of their older games in terms of paper and whatnot, but nothing to get really excited about. But this stuff must be much cheaper, and like everything glossy, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I'm finding the glare, you know, and yes, there are probably ways to reduce glare, being really, really problematic with my eyes. It's one of the reasons I avoid using plexiglass. Is it almost invariably gives a glare, and the glossy counters are a problem, especially as my eyes get worse and worse. All right, one more turn for this video, I guess. I'm having a hard time playing. You know, yesterday I basically, and a little bit of today, read, what the hell is it? The Hunger Games, which I found the first book of that in one of the little libraries, and it's pretty damn good, actually. I buzzed through that. Now I'm on like some trilogy that I have. No, I'm in 3 books of a larger series. I'm wading through, and it's not as pleasant, so maybe I'll game more. I don't know. It was just very, very seductive to just stay up way too late reading. I find it very hard. I find it as addictive as computer games, maybe not quite as much so, but I don't feel terrible after I've like stayed up all night reading. Well, Thanksgiving kind of was a write-off, not for reasons that normal people would have, although close enough. It's a very sad time for me, for whatever reasons. It has always been. There are a few happy moments that I see with sadness, of course. But anyway, it was pretty out. I went out for a nice melancholy walk and wallowed in my autumnness, and didn't get a lot played because I also made myself my excuse for Thanksgiving dinner, which was very good, but because I know how to cook, actually. But I didn't get a lot played. I watched a lot of news type shows and stuff. Comedy. Watched some Dean Martin roast of Muhammad Ali, why, I don't know. But I did manage to make it up here. It's actually the morning of Friday at some point or another, I'm sure. And played out the beginning of the French turn. And oh boy, did the Allies or Entente fall back hard. First of all, I have to make my alignment, you know, up to Verdun. Yeah. Not too hard, but it means falling back over here in Alsace. But much, much uglier was looking at the situation the Belgians had. And I'm sitting in this location here, but the rest of the line's fallen back even further. We've given up Dunkirk. The fort Should have happened earlier when I first withdrew out of there. But the fort got a withdrawal roll, so which was unlikely, actually. So they continued falling back as well. That means I have to bring the British up in line with them. That meant the French had to come in line. And given the situation around Maubeuge, etc., we made a much, much more reasonable line, and we're abandoning Maubeuge. However, the amount of damage we've taken, even with this shorter line, although we've managed to connect up with the Brits, so it's not that short. And there's a lot of density here in terms of damaged units that are trying to recover. Even with this shorter line, I had to create a 2-hex unit. But I think Maubeuge is going to prevent that from getting struck. Well, once I do that, I'm freed up to do it up over here too, because I'm pretty damn sure the Germans can't just punch through there. Most of this back here, not changing much. We are launching an attack. What attack? Yeah, you know, we're on the defensive. All right. It's actually getting kind of exciting with this. You know, I am seeing the line beginning to collapse. Oh, but on the other hand, I did manage to get a couple extra units. Not extra units on the board, but garrisons, again, getting released. And, you know, the French are going to have reinforcements essentially coming to that front line, which is the rarest of things in this game. Once you get past the first couple turns, there ain't much new stuff coming on the board. And that which does may not show up, like the English naval units, because Antwerp was gone already. They're gone. I'm seeing a very different from the historical situation, of course. Right. The degree to which the Belgians especially ran away meant there was no room, no way that the Germans could catch them and make an attack without forced marching. It doesn't seem like a reasonable plan. Although that may be how you start the game. It may be what you have to do to start the game, is to chase them and engage them and fight them and push them back even further than they're trying to run away. I'm not sure. I know that I didn't feel like there was some gap that I could just go charging up through. There was always stuff in the way, and getting multiple attacks in a turn might not be the most trivial thing in the world. I gotta turn those Parisian rail units. Otherwise they'll confuse me. Not a lot of attacks. The French attack didn't do much. Really nothing did much. What we are seeing, though, the Germans made some advance, I don't know where. Somewhere over here in this sector. I think this space was an advance. That's putting this unit into a lot of ugliness, and it really shouldn't have been sitting there anyway. But whatever. That kind of defect might end up causing the line to fall back further, having had that extension out there, and now it's going to get weakened trying to get out of there. Although actually that advance came at a cost to German morale for their units of out of everything. Usually when you get an advance, you get decent bonuses to your die roll, and that was the case here. You know, no penalty to the die roll, essentially, whereas the defending unit does take one. Well, here the defender got off scot-free, and one of the attacking units got an unlucky roll, or one of the attacking hexes got an unlucky roll, and they were already damaged a little bit, so now they're in worse shape, and that may slow any kind of advance up. The one thing I did want to mention is I'm running out of entrenchment markers. Not these guys, which I assume are actually sort of a countermix limit, although you got the extended 2-hex units for it, but these temporary ones. And in some cases I'm using a rail marker to indicate that. In some cases, I've got them covering multiple units. I think this is just a particularly bad time when everybody's kind of partially, low end partially entrenching for whatever reason, the reformation of the French line and the fact that we're able to entrench everywhere basically because we're coming up on the interphase. So I want everything kind of within one of being entrenched. If that's something that can be done. One of the big reasons for that is, hey, I can recover in the trenches. I can't recover anywhere else. Screw it, man. You know, spending the points on entrenching when you're down 1 or 2 CEL makes sense. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say. I don't think there is. Yeah, that's about it. I keep forgetting about rail points. I'm pretty damn sure I'm not exceeding them. I'm doing very limited rail movement. But, you know, I've got... There is a limit to them. You know, there's only 9 in the interface for the French. The Germans even less, at 7. But I just forget to expend those points. And I don't think I've moved that many divisions over the course of the interface. Really what it's a limitation to is, hey, you can't be moving, you know, a whole army at once, usually. Or if you are, that's all you're going to be moving for that turn. Or for that interface period, whatever. So yeah, that's about it. Now I remember what I was going to say. Has to do with the investing of Maubeuge. I'm not there yet, but as soon as it is, it's not going to necessarily fall, but there's only 1 point left to the fortress there. It recovered a point this turn, it lost a point to the bombardment. As soon as all those points are gone, Maubeuge it just surrenders. And I think I still have to, like, I don't know. I don't want to think, I don't want to say anything about that, actually. But yeah, it becomes just a see, I'm wondering, I think I bombarded and reduced this fortress. I think this is not on the board. I don't think I forced my way into that hex on an unbombarded fortress. So I'm going to actually take that off. I shouldn't have been rolling for it all this time. That doesn't mean it can't come back, but it does mean that I'm loose in terms of being able to move around. I get a little confused thinking that, like, you got to do something more than flip the fortress over. Well, you do. You have to reduce its levels. But I think the bombardment had actually done it there. And I just forgot that that means it is actually destroyed. There's this subtle little interplay of differences. You can attack a fortress. If you capture the hex, you flip it over, you've done no step losses to it. And I get a little confused by, like, flipping over a fortress when I bombard it down, and I don't keep track of the step losses necessarily, which means, because it's not really off the board, or I don't want it off the board if it's stacked with an enemy unit, because it can come back very easily. For any of these fortresses that have been captured to come back, really the French have to go on an offensive and retake those hexes. That might be of importance in this area. I could see the Germans losing that territory, but I really don't want to because of the fortresses. I think we're okay on all the lines. It doesn't really matter. Germans get a movement before that takes place, but I think we've got the contiguous lines right now. Germans could conceivably break the French line and maybe get a victory point that way. Yeah, okay. The German side, not a lot going on down here. I'm gonna do another one of them prep fires. Again, I don't have much use for them, and I think I got a decent shot at that hex. Not sure I terribly want that hex. It creates another little bulge, but that little bulge may allow me to, you know, straighten my line in certain places, so screw it. We'll keep going. Maubeuge is invested, which means if my artillery takes it down, it surrenders, which is probably a good reason to try to get those units out of there. They're in supply in Maubeuge. The fortress itself has a supply source on it. So, and here's the problem. This thing only has a 1 hex range. I can only move 1 hex out of Maubeuge. So maybe I just want to sit there. But if I get out of there, I become a problem. You know? So I don't know. I don't know which is better and which is worse, to tell you the truth. Some sporadic attacks along here, giving up the entrenchments that I was starting to dig in order. And it's not clear in my mind, but I vaguely remember if you do something where you spend movement points while you're doing a task, it obviates that task. I only have 1 entrenchment left, and it just worked out that instead of laying any of them down, launching all these attacks made more sense. So we got a whole bunch of these back. In addition to, we consolidated our entrenchments here that we wanted to make. And it's a good turn not to make the attacks because we've got to maintain the line, etc. A lot of weird stuff going on here. We've been having kind of weird stuff going on there all along, but you know, attacks in different directions over here. We're actually trying to penetrate and get around the BEF. We're still letting the British get off easy. I could have attacked one of these British units, this one probably. Well, no, this one was the most likely to have been attacked. Instead, I shifted a corps over and try to make more punch through here. Because I think the Belgian situation is, even though I'm smacking the shit out of it, is pretty much a foregone conclusion. But there are points up here to grab, and by getting this territory, I can force the British back again without actually having to fight real units. The Belgians don't really, they're much weaker. Their tactical quality is, or whatever it is, their proficiency is so low. All right, that'll put me to the Entente reactions. Alrighty, after the German turn, bullying the Belgians a little further. Lots of, this got fired off. Lots of attacks that, I mean, they made a little bit of motion against the French. The Belgians, though, are just not in good shape. They are the weak point in the line, and there's not a lot I can do about that. I think I have to give them, like, some frontage, no matter what. I'm not sure. Maybe I can withdraw them and, you know, from the line entirely, if it ever. But I'm also stretching the line too thin, and so I kind of have to give them frontage for that reason anyway, as opposed to by any kind of rules limitation. Maubeuge falling. Well, that opens up 2 more German corps in an area of the front that the French are pretty weak in. The Maubeuge fortification itself was holding part of the front before. The lines tightened up a little bit. But also a big unit surrendered. That's worth some victory points, showed up over there. I got another garrison that's going to surrender. That'll be worth a point as well, as the line just keeps pushing beyond those areas. Not a lot else moved as far as I can tell. Nobody's going to get any penalties as we move into the interface for discontiguous lines. We've, where needed, we stretched our units. And in some cases, that's fine, like this. This isn't going to get hurt. I'm just trying to hold the fortifications that I've built. But in other cases, like over here, or even potentially here, there's some risk that that could just bust through. And as we saw, there's some danger to letting a fortress get invested. It would be a long process, though, to reduce all the fortresses around Verdun. In fact, it may not be possible. Well, sure it is, because you can't rebuild fortification levels as long as you're invested. So that's close to what I'm limited to right now. My prep fire didn't, well, it wasn't terrible, but it didn't do what it needed to do. It didn't push the hex. But again, I'm not going to make it to Paris this game. Are there potentials for a German victory? I mean, I don't know. It depends. If some massive breakthrough, and I'm always saying, yeah, they're not possible, but this French line just keeps getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Yeah, I threw a couple more units into it. We'll see what comes from the reinforcements, etc. Okay, Germans again used up all their replacement points. French used up almost none, like 4. I don't know. They have almost, they have what they generated during this period. The Germans still have huge quantities left from the intensive assaults that they've made. And they sprinkled a few in additionally to cause themselves more damage, right? To some extent, you might think, well, maybe the French should be counterattacking, but it's not really about the strength point losses. So much of it's about the CEL, and you don't want to wear yourself down there. You don't want to make ineffective attacks there. You basically have these two different vectors, and they both have to be kept in good shape. Out of the two, I would guess the CEL is the more important. Although it's easier to recover, it's the one where you're not going to be able to fight effectively if you don't have it. A few strength points difference, hey, that might be a column shift. I see something kind of frightening, a bunch of, what looks like another British corps coming in terms of the Germans being able to make any advances of significance. If those aren't just replacements, if that's not just a formation advantage, and I don't think it is, I think it's another full British corps coming in. We're starting to see forces that can fill in the gaps, that can keep the Germans from breaking things up, which makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, historically, I'm so far behind with the Germans. The idea that I might be able to recoup some of those failed opportunities at this point in the game seems ridiculous. I'm probably going to be taking a break for a while. There's something else I want to play, and there's something that I sort of agreed to review, sort of, kind of. I was interested in it when information came out. I was like, I really can't commit. But the guy agreed to, or decided, whatever, he'd send me a copy anyway. And now that I've got it, and I think I can. So we'll take a look at that. That's going to be a kind of Twilight Struggle-ish-esque game. 2 minutes to midnight is Kickstarter type thing, and we'll see what it looks like. It's not a CDG. It's card assisted, whatever. More like a coin type design in terms of you flip cards over and they take their effect as kind of events, but they also trigger the player's actions. But the rule book's a little iffy, so and some of the concepts are a little weird. It's probably not too much more complicated than Twilight Struggle, but it doesn't make sense as easily. So I'm probably gonna fiddle around with that without video, and then come back and do the presentation. So, in terms of this, I'll see you back probably in a week or two. And maybe I'll know how to play still. I just can't give up. Like, my thoughts were, hey, I could stop. That way I have this, the table space here, which is enough for this other game. But I have another room that has table space for this, for something. And, I'm still feeling some interest in what this is providing. The core system I like. Some of the details that it goes into, maybe to keep the detail of the game at the same level as the combat system, starts telling on me, and I see a lot less value to it. Usually I'm in favor of like, hey, let's try to distribute and make sure the complexity is equal across the board. Like, that's my big argument in favor of a world at war as opposed to WIF. WIF feels like it's all over the place in terms of the level of detail it has. But this army command structure stuff, I feel like I'm fiddling around with pieces and assigning them to stuff, and I can almost always manage what I want to do. It's just hard work, The same thing with, well, maybe not all the rail rules, but some of the rail rules. I feel like a simpler setup, a simpler set of rules for the rail movement makes more sense. And I can see people who would abhor the combat system. It requires several checks, right? You make your odds check, you do all kind of calculations, and they're not trivial. Your shifts, etc., again, not trivial. Then you roll 2 dice, and from those 2 dice, for every hex that's in the game, you got to roll another pair of dice and check against all those organizational values. And there's a reason this game is taking a while to play. It's not Developed Krieg. It's not SCS. It's a significant undertaking in a lot of the mechanical aspects, and some of them I just feel like they go overboard. Again, I'm cool with the combat system. What's really nice about it is that it leaves you with this sort of, it's variable enough and it's hard enough to decipher that, other than kind of, I should really like be doing prepared attacks at 2-to-1, maybe not prepared at 3-to-1, because I get that extra shift, and then when I'm working against entrenchments, factor that all in. You kind of learn that fairly quickly, but you don't have any real expectations as to coming out of it particularly good with those odds. There's a fair chance that you can come out the loser out of them. It won't be terrible, but it'll slow your attacks down. And there's a chance that you could get a breakthrough, or, wear the enemy out more quickly. There's advantages to the attack, there's no question about that. The defender kind of has to maintain a line. The attacker doesn't have to, but the attacker could screw up and try to attack what looks like an exposed position and end up facing more defenders than, if they're stupid, like I am, than they expected. All right. Send this up and see you in a while. I don't know how long it's going to take me to fiddle around on my own before I start videoing the thing.